Welcome to Cafe DC. I'm Faz Rahman, and today we are talking to a very prominent Washington scholar, Bob Hathaway, Dr. Bob Hathaway, who served for a long time as Asia program, as the director of Asia program here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, a center which has been named after the 28th President of the United States. And we are lucky to have Dr. Hathaway live with us here at his own place. Bob, after having served actually for 15 and a half years, you came back again to this institution. Why?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it says something about what a great place the Wilson Center is. But it also does serious work on issues that I care about, including Pakistan, including Afghanistan, other countries of the subcontinent. So I was asked to come back to write a book, and I jumped at the opportunity. I spent 4.5 months in retirement away from Washington, loved every minute of it, but Washington is where it's happening, so I'm delighted to be back.
Pulls you
here.
right back, yeah, I know.
Absolutely. Maybe because a case of Potomac fever.
Exactly, okay. Bob, after all these years, you have interacted with so many world leaders. You have appointed so many scholars from different parts of the world at this institution. And that's why we chose to talk to you at this point. I mean, this is a very important time, not just here in this country, but around the world. You see lots of changes. The Afghan issue is still live, but the forces are coming back. What do you think is going to happen? Based on your interactions with world leaders, especially leaders from Afghanistan and Pakistan, what's your idea? What's your vision? What's your looking into the future?
Well, Fez, if I could look into the future, I'd be a whole lot wealthier than I am.
Well, I'm sure you are.
No.
In some sense, at least. Yeah.
Well, perhaps so, but more specifically, I would have made a whole lot more money in the stock market than I've made.
Money is just part of being wealthy, just one part.
Of course, yeah. But so my crystal ball isn't any better than anyone else's. But one is struck by how many key issues might be resolved, or at least we get a better sense of where they're heading during the coming year. You look around the world. China is clearly on the rise in a way that clearly unsettles many of its neighbors, as well as some people further afield. In Pakistan is grappling with a vicious war against militancy and extremism and hatred. Just 2.5 weeks ago, Pakistan suffered a grievous blow with the deaths of 150, mainly children, in the vicious attack on the school in Peshawar. Right next door, Afghanistan is wrestling with those types of issues and many others. They have a brand new government, well, not quite brand new now. The Ghani government's been in power for 100 days.
But still without a cabinet.
Still without a cabinet, and while there have been things to be encouraged about over the last 100 days, it's still very much up in the air, and I think 2015 will help to decide that. You go further west, you've got turmoil and chaos in Iraq and Syria. You've got uncertainty about what might or might not happen with respect to the Iranian nuclear program. Greece is once again in deep financial trouble. There's slow growth or no growth throughout most of Europe. Almost wherever you look, one is impressed and even overwhelmed by the problems. That, of course, is the definition of statesmanship. Turning problems into solutions. Hopefully we'll see at least some partial solutions in the coming year. On Afghanistan specifically, people are beginning to get concerned because, as we just said, it hasn't been more than 3 months that the new government's been in power, and yet they haven't done sort of the basic first step of appointing a cabinet and beginning to function as a government. If the press reports are to be believed, the bureaucracies and ministries throughout Afghanistan are rudderless, and that is not only increasing instability, it makes the Afghan people very fearful about the future, including their economic future. One hopes that within a very, very near term, Ghani is able to appoint not simply a cabinet, but a strong, effective, vigorous, honest cabinet. And that's a tall order. It's a tall order for any country, given Afghanistan's tragic history over the past 35 years. It's a particular challenge for them. But as I say, Ghani has in some ways impressed. He seems to be personally an absolute honest man. He seems to be committed to moving against the corruption, which was so much a hallmark of the previous government. He seems committed to dealing with violence and with the extremists. He signed almost as soon as entering office a bilateral security agreement with the United States, a status of forces agreement with the NATO countries, so that both America and NATO are going to keep troops in Afghanistan for several more years. As some of your viewers may know, Ghani on the American television program 60 Minutes just several days ago raised the question of perhaps America and NATO staying beyond the 2016 deadline. That's not going to be wildly popular either in this country or in NATO, but Ghani himself has a great deal of ability to determine whether or not Washington and the NATO capitals in Europe seriously consider that request a year, 18 months from now. If he provides good government, if he provides vigor and forcefulness, if he provides honesty and genuine leadership to Afghanistan, then I think there'll be a lot of people here in the United States and in Europe who will believe that if it takes a bit more time than 2 more years, then maybe it would be worth it. We'll wait and see.
But do you think, of course, helping with the law and order situation and some security, addressing some security issues, leaving behind these 13,000 or so, I suppose, troops, not combat troops, support troops, would help address some of those issues which you just mentioned as being a tall order?
Well, it may help. Again, we don't know. But a lot of people who know Afghanistan well argued that one of the principal problems was simply the presence of tens of thousands of foreign troops. Now, from our perspective, and I think from the perspective of many Afghans, those foreign troops, prominently American troops, were there to be helpful. But nonetheless, their very presence created resentment and antagonism toward the Kabul government. So perhaps as the number of foreigners has drawn down and continues to draw down, that will relieve one of the grievances against the Kabul government. So we'll see. Clearly there's a lot to be done on the political, economic, and security fronts. And we'll have to see what happens.
Bob, some pundits have seen exactly the opposite. As the drawdown began, you saw a rise in those attacks, especially in and around Kabul. Do you think it may have an exactly the opposite effect, that the forces, especially Taliban and their kind, they would try to now destabilize the government as they see this as an opportunity?
Well, they've always been trying to destabilize the government. They may in fact be encouraged as the U.S. and NATO forces both draw down and transition to a non-combat role. Now let's be clear. I have no doubts but that American troops will come under fire and will return fire in the next 2 years. And indeed, the White House has admitted as much. So it won't be that the little bit over 10,000 American troops that are going to be there for the coming months are going to be hunkered down in the embassy and protected. They will still be in harm's way. They will almost certainly and inevitably take casualties. So if the Taliban thinks it can simply walk into Kabul, it's wrong, both because of the foreign troops still there, but far more importantly, most indicators, not all, but most indicators suggest that the security forces and the police forces of Afghanistan are growing in their capabilities and their competence. And moreover, it seems that those forces, for the most part, are committed to defeating the Taliban. If the Taliban are going to be defeated, it's not going to be because the Americans or the British or the Germans or the Italians did it. It's because the Afghans and the Afghan people did it. And that's one of these things that are going to play out over the coming years, so we'll have a better sense of what the security situation is going to look like in the aftermath of the U.S. drawdown.
Very well. So Bob, we have to take a short break here, but after we come back from the break, I'm going to ask about this another tragedy, another horrendous attack in Paris. So let's be prepared to answer a few questions about that. We'll be right back. Please don't go away.
This just happened, but it seems to me that the most recent tragedy, this one in Paris, simply underscores how all of us throughout the world face a new and challenging and frequently deadly threat.
Welcome back. I'm Faiz Rahman, and our guest today is Dr. Robert Hathaway of Woodrow Wilson Center. Okay, Bob, so before we went to break, we were talking about Afghanistan, and now just one question or maybe a few more thoughts about the tragedy, the horrific attack in Paris. 12 people died, and again, this is not the first attack in Europe and in the West. We don't know the exact details of that attack yet, but what do you think? I mean, it's a freedom of press. In the press, there have been some comments and conversations about it's being more about the freedom of the press. Some people, some fanatics, extremists, they were unhappy with what the paper did, and they attacked some innocent journalists. So your thoughts, please.
Yeah. Well, Fez, as you rightly said, we don't know many things that one hopes we'll know in the next few days. This just happened. But it seems to me that the most recent tragedy, this one in Paris, simply underscores how all of us throughout the world face a new and challenging and frequently deadly threat. We're not free of danger because we happen to live in New York or Washington or Chicago or Paris or any of the other major cities. All of us around the world
whether in
have
Peshawar, Lahore, Karachi,
exactly,
or all these cities
exactly,
that you mentioned. Yes,
exactly. All of us have a stake in this global challenge that we face. Now, it appears, based upon the early evidence, that this particular attack came about because a handful of people were offended by something that had been published this is still speculation, but I think that's
Exactly,
our
yes.
understanding at this point. We have to learn, when I say we, I mean all of us throughout the world, have to learn that there is such a value in the ability of men and women to freely exchange ideas, even odious ideas. And we should value that as among the most precious of rights that are rights for everyone. To the extent, if it proves to be the case, that this was an attack against freedom of thought, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, then this is an attack not just against one place in Paris, but it's an attack against us all. And I hope out of this tragedy will come a renewed determination on the part of all men and women of goodwill from around the world to work together on behalf of freedoms, including this very precious freedom of speech and freedom of thought.
Very good. Bob, let's talk about the Asia program. At the outset, we talked, I said that you've been in contact with so many world leaders. Do you have some anecdotes to share with us? Like, what was your, especially, people from Pakistan.
Yeah.
You have hosted a few very prominent, high-profile guests here. So.
Well, I've had the good fortune. My first trip to Pakistan was more than 25 years ago, and I've had the good fortune of having some sort of casual or more than casual interaction with most of Pakistan's leaders since the 1980s. One humorous anecdote that I'll share with your viewers is that Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, after she had been Prime Minister the first time, but prior to her second Prime Ministership, came to visit me and got lost in this building. The Wilson Center is in one corner of a huge
Ronald Reagan building, yes.
Building, and she was with her security people, and her security people kept calling me on my phone and saying, "We're right there, we'll be there in 3 minutes," and then 5 minutes later, "We're almost there, we'll be there in 5 minutes." I finally had to leave the Wilson Center, go elsewhere in the building to find her. And I'm thinking, here, if one of the most influential, esteemed people in the world can't even find their way through this building, what are the rest, with a retinue of security people, what are the rest of us going to do?
Yes, Benazir Bhutto, of course, you rightly said, very prominent, a very accomplished person, and too bad, Pakistan lost her.
A great tragedy.
So early, it's a great tragedy. And before actually she went to Pakistan, the last time she did, after she got killed, if I remember, she was here at the Middle East Institute, and then also she interacted with some of the scholars here at the center as well.
Mm-hmm. In fact, she spoke here several times over the years.
Yes. How closely are you monitoring the current state of affairs in Pakistan?
Pretty closely. As we mentioned earlier, I'm retired, and I spent the last 4 months away from Washington, which in this case means away from some of your news sources of news. But for better or for worse, Pakistan remains one of my abiding loves and concerns, and I anticipate that I will continue to try to be as up-to-date as I can be on Pakistan.
So before we get a little deeper into Asia program and its Pakistan program, for that matter, let's talk about the Woodrow Wilson Center itself. What is it? Why it was named after a president, and it's supposed to be a think tank.
Right. Well, it's unique among all the think tanks here in town because the Wilson Center was created by an act of Congress in the 1960s as the official memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. We at the Wilson Center seek to replicate and commemorate Wilson's twin passions of good scholarship and good public policy. And we see ourselves as a bridge between the world of the scholar and the world of the policymaker. And every meeting, and when I retired last year, I looked back and realized I'd hosted about 800 meetings here. And virtually every meeting we have, not only the Asia program, but the rest of my colleagues in the Wilson Center, we have both scholars and academics and policymakers in the room for every meeting. So it's really a special place, and that's one of the reasons why I'm delighted to be back here to work on my own book.
Good. What's the topic of your book?
Power, the exercise of power, and how so often we're frustrated in our efforts to exercise power.
I see. So it's like more, it's not just from one area or so to speak.
No, it'll be, I'll have a global view. Because of my own interests and my own experience and backgrounds, I will use the U.S.-Pakistan relationship as one of the examples that I'll have, but I hope to have about 24 examples from around the world about how states have successfully wielded power and how frequently they've been frustrated in their efforts to influence the behavior of others.
So how soon can we buy one copy?
Well, I have to write it first. Ask me that in 12 months.
12, okay, that's not too long. Well, you said the center itself is unique, right? It's a unique think tank. But President Wilson was also a unique president because some of the things that he did, basically, those things define today's United States.
In many ways, he set the tone for the 20th century. He was the American president throughout the First World War, and of course the 20th century was a horrifically bloody war, dominated by war throughout, particularly the first half of the century. He more so than any of his predecessors, led the United States into the international arena. He led the United States into a European war for the first time in American history. But he's frequently remembered more for his efforts in creating an international organization, the League of Nations, whose principal purpose was to see that the world would no longer be racked by war. Now, he failed in both the narrow mission of getting the United States into the League of Nations, but also in the broader mission of building a peaceful world. But nonetheless, his example at the end of the First World War influenced leaders from around the world in the aftermath of the Second World War, led to not only to the creation of the United Nations, but more importantly, to the idea that the nations of the world have an obligation and a responsibility to work together for peace. And as tragic and as bloody as the decades have been since 1945, the fact of the matter is, so far, 70 years now, we at least have avoided a global war. And I think that is in part a reflection of the goal and the vision that Woodrow Wilson had.
He stayed overseas over more than 6 months, right?
It was a different era in those days, and he went to Europe twice in late 1918 and early 1919 to directly negotiate the peace that ended World War I.
Yes.
And there were many nations involved in those negotiations, and they were very complex, and he was frequently frustrated in achieving his own ambitions. But he spent the better part of the first half of 1919 in Europe with the other world leaders negotiating this. It's a whole lot easier to carry out diplomacy today. You don't have to leave, and in fact,
they didn't have the jets back then. So
they didn't have jets. I mean, ocean voyages took a week or 2 weeks. communications back and forth between Europe and North America or Europe and Asia were nothing like they are now. You couldn't Skype, you couldn't instant message. So he spent a long time out of the country. We'll never see another American president.
When he got the treaty, after his diplomacy and his his work, he was one of the reluctant participants in those meetings. Basically, they thought the Germans were being pressed too hard and into submission, and that would have had a negative effect. And President Wilson was of the opinion that we had to be a little bit easy on the Germans, and he proved right in the sense that
easy's probably not a good word, but he was certainly not vindictive like particularly the British and the French were. But they had suffered far more grievously than had the Americans, who got in the war late and who really didn't get sizable numbers of troops into Europe and into the battle until the very end of 1917, just a year before the end of the war. So Wilson was clearly disappointed in many aspects of the peace treaty, of which he was one of the principal authors. But nonetheless, he supported it because it also created what was his passion and his love, the League of Nations. Then, of course, the tragedy and the irony is, having worked so hard and made, in his mind, so many compromises in order to get the League, he then came home and couldn't sell it to the United States Senate, which, under the American Constitution, the Senate has to approve of any treaty by a 2/3 vote, and he couldn't sell it to the Senate, and so the United States never joined the League of Nations.
Asia program. So we also have a Pakistan program, and it started, I think, probably 10, 12 years ago, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And there was a group of businessmen in Karachi, Pakistan, who basically sponsored this chair or this fellowship. How is it going? What you have accomplished, and what was your participation in creating this program for Pakistan at this
well,
important
if I may say so, I was sort of in the middle of it. When I came to the Wilson Center as the director of the Asia program, my experience for the last dozen years prior to that was working for the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives. And I had spent a lot of time in those years on Capitol Hill worrying about Pakistan. When I came to the Wilson Center, one of my primary ambitions was to expand our treatment of and help promote an understanding of Pakistan. Shortly after I got here, a group of public-spirited citizens from Pakistan, based primarily, though not exclusively, in Karachi, came to the Wilson Center and said, we would like to help you, the Wilson Center, in your efforts to focus more on Pakistan. This group, the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, then became the partner of the Asia program from, I think, 2004 up to the present day. One of the things they did for us each year, and they still are doing it, and I'm immensely grateful, is that they provided the financial support where we were able to hold a competition open only to Pakistanis to bring one Pakistan scholar to the Wilson Center every year. Now, when I say scholar, I'm talking in a broad sense of anyone who wants to and is undertaking serious research on an important public policy related topic. Some of our Pakistan scholars have been journalists, some have been academicians, ambassadors, retired diplomats, a businessman, civil society people. We have had a variety of backgrounds of the Pakistanis we have brought here. They all come in order to write a book. We've gotten a number of marvelous books out of this program, and I anticipate just the books that are still being worked on. In the next several years, we're going to have 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 more good books just that are still in the backlog. It takes a long time to write a book, and it takes almost as long to publish the book after it's written.
Absolutely.
But if were it not for the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, to whom I'm immensely indebted, the Wilson Center would not have been able to feature Pakistan and work as much as it has.
It's a great example of a partnership, basically.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Citizens.
It's one of the good things about. I mean, we so frequently focus on the areas of controversy and disagreement between our two countries, but it's a perfect example about how working together can create a win-win situation for both countries. The Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. have been greatly enriched by our ability to work on Pakistan, and we hope that Pakistan and Pakistanis have also benefited from the exchanges, from the conferences, from the publications we've done, from the insights that we've contributed to on Pakistan and on the U.S.-Pakistan relationship.
Very good. Dr. Bob Hathaway, thank you very much for your time. Great discussion. And we wish you all the best with your work ahead. And looking forward to buying a copy soon.
I'll give you one.
Absolutely.
Maybe you'll invite me back on your show
Absolutely,
to talk about
anytime.
the book.
No, that'll happen regardless. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
sir.
you for
Thank
having me.
Thank you very much for watching Cafe DC. I'm Faiz Rahman saying goodbye this week from Washington, D.C.